Hello everyone, and welcome to this episode of NAWG, a history podcast. Not Another White Guy is an episodic production focusing on women and people of color in history whose contributions to life as we know it have been overlooked or claimed by someone else. I dive into new topics and showcase a new historical figure bi-weekly. If you haven't had the chance, go ahead and check out episode 0. The link is in the description below. There, I explain the mission of this podcast in detail. I also introduce myself and my interest in history and representation. The most important message that I want to put out there is that just because our history classes were full of white guys, that doesn't mean that they're the only ones who did anything noteworthy. Am I diminishing their achievements? No. But I am asking, what was everyone else up to? And what are we missing today? I asked myself going into this, who has changed modern life as we know it? Who else belongs in history books? So if any of these questions spark any interest in you, then I invite you to like this video and subscribe to this channel to join me on this journey of discovery and learning. I'm learning right along with you all and can't wait to see what we find next. Spoiler alert! I've already found dozens of figures who I want to share with the world, so stay tuned. YouTube limits new creators to only having 10-minute videos, so I introduce you to this 3-part mini-series for our first episode. I hope you enjoy. So today's subject is an absolutely fascinating individual. She is a cultural icon that, in its heyday, MGM paraded as the most beautiful girl in the world. She radiated glamour, poise, and sophistication, and the world loved her for it. But while the world was entranced by her Austrian accent and commanding screen presence, this lovely actress had another little-known skill. She was an intellectual genius. For you see, this superstar was also an inventor. The kind of inventor that changed how we use communication systems to this day. She was degraded and diminished for her work, and only in her sunset years did she even receive an official nod to her genius. Her technology is still used today in military operations, GPS, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and cell phone communications. Welcome to the life and breakthrough inventions of Hedy Lamarr. Episode 1, Part 1. Let's begin. Hedy Lamarr was born Hedwig Marie Kiesler in Vienna in November 1914. Her youth in Vienna was during an exciting time of artistic, cultural, and musical awakening. Pre-World War II, Vienna was home to a hotbed of rising stars in music composition, playwriting, photography, and just about anything musically or artistically inclined. With a population of over 2 million, Vienna was a bustling metropolis of high class and culture, especially in the wealthy and cultured 19th district, where Hedy called home. Pre-World War II, Vienna didn't have a care in the world, and most of her residents didn't worry twice about outside politics. But of course, that would change in the years to come. But for now, Hedy grew up in the culturally wealthy and heavily Jewish 19th district. When Hedy was 19, after a budding career of acting at premier theaters and a number of Czechoslovakian pictures, she married infamous munitions dealer and manufacturer Fritz Mandel. Now, Fritz had led a very aggressive courtship that involved leaving her flowers and letters after every performance and calling her mother himself and insisting on an introduction with Hedy. Fritz had a very high seat in society. He was a rich man, having rebuilt and managed his father's munitions manufacturing and distribution company. Some of his dealings were shady work, but he had very high-profile guests in his inner circle. So naturally, her parents encouraged the union on the promise of financial security and the impression that he would take care of their daughter beyond her wildest needs. and her budding career had given her a taste for fashion and baubles, so this seemed like a no-brainer. While Hedy had many relationships in her life, in Europe and later in the United States, this particular marriage is important because it introduced her to military technology and what was popular in German military equipment and weaponry. This would later come into play as she became an active inventor. But at the time, the social engagements were an absolute bore to poor Hedy. This poor woman quickly learned that her marriage, that initially promised intrigue and adventure, was a golden prison, as she later puts it. Mandel was a powerful and influential man, and it was in fashion for powerful men to have a young, beautiful woman on their arm. And Hedy, being the most captivatingly beautiful rising star in Europe, fit the bill. Once married, however, Mandel quickly became an obsessive, controlling, and maniacally jealous spouse. He had every moment of every day of Hedy's life monitored and reported back to him. Every phone call was recorded, every close friend on his payroll. She was not allowed personal free time or unsupervised visits to town. He was insanely jealous of the response that she evoked from men that she interacted with. Hated the looks that she received. She desired to visit the factories, as she was an active thinker and tinkerer from a young age. She would immensely enjoy seeing these great machines and military technology built, instead of just hearing the tiny bits of theology mentioned in social events. But he forbade it. He couldn't stand the thought of all of those male workers looking at his wife. His jealousy knew no bounds. As the Second Great War neared, danger and pressure soon reached even Vienna, the threat of Hitler growing with every passing day. Her father, who she adored beyond anyone else, who to her last days she claimed was the only man who truly loved her, died suddenly of a heart attack in 1937. The stress and uncertainty of the days ahead proving too much for him. She recalls this being a particularly devastating time in her life. This was the man who, in her childhood, would take her on long walks through Vienna, explaining how the world around them worked, how every machine interacted together to make all of the moving parts of the great city. She recalls in an interview how he once pointed out a trolley car, and they spent a great deal of time discussing how trolleys worked and functioned. He was a truly intelligent man who encouraged ingenuity and inventive thinking in his own daughter. Above all else, he told her to be herself and give the world all that she could give. It was this last sentiment that drove her to make a life change. She was not happy under the tyranny of Mandel, and critically, he forbade her from acting during their marriage. His obsessive ownership of her wouldn't even dream of her continuing her career in film. As it was, he was obsessively buying up every copy of a certain film where she appeared in the nude. Not out of any sort of admiration of the film, just the opposite. He deliriously thought the more copies he purchased, the fewer eyes would see this film and the shame it brought him. Her role in Ecstasy was iconic, and in a way historic, as it was the first non-pornographic depiction of nudity and lovemaking. It made a big splash at the time, earning awards and praise in France, but denounced as immoral by the Pope himself. But by today's standards, it would have been awarded a generous PG-13 rating. Thank you for listening to Episode 1, Part 1, and continue on to Part 2. Thank you. And if you like what you heard, don't forget to like and subscribe. All of our social media links are in the video description below. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. I'll be posting clues about who our next episodes will be on, and I'd love to hear about who you guys would like to learn about next in future episodes of NAWG.